In the 1920s, Hendrik Johannes van der Bijl, an electrical engineer and industrialist and regarded as one of the greatest South Africans for his contribution to the country's development, brought his vision for an industrialized South Africa to life. He was the driving force behind the establishment of Eskom and the South African Steel and Iron Corporation, Escor, with cheap inputs secured through strategic state involvement in securing iron ore feedstock for Escor and cheap electricity prices combined with cheap labor. South Africa powered ahead to become the most industrialized nation on the African continent. Fast forward almost 100 years and the situation couldn't be further from that. Eskom is a more constrained to growth than Enabler as prices have skyrocketed, and Escor was sold to Indian businessman Lakshmi Mittal, as we know, to become Arcelor Mittal South Africa, Africa's biggest steel producer in the mid-2000s, and is trading now as something of a penny stock, a shadow of its former glory. Its workforce halved since that Lakshmi deal, and the reindustrialization and steel pricing debate rages in South Africa as we look to turn the situation around. Downstream consumers complain that artificially high prices are undercutting our manufacturing competitiveness. But prices are kept high due to import duties granted to AMSA to combat the flood of steel from China. And by relying on subsidies in contravention of World Trade Organization rules, China was quickly able to undercut competitors globally and flood the world with cheap steel. Some producers, such as Japan, followed China's prices down, though at tremendous cost. Others refused to drop their prices, but ultimately lost market share. And just about everyone began to panic, and steel became the sector with the most duty-related remedies by a long way. As a result, China sought out less protected markets for its steel, and a small part of that Chinese steel arrived in South Africa. And in our terms, it seemed like a lot. For China, probably just a rounding error. Now, AMSA, hemorrhaging cash, turned to the government to impose import duties. In principle, duties should be applied as close to the consumer as possible. The further upstream you go, the more difficult it is to predict what the impact of a duty might be. And you can't get further upstream than AMSA. Now, AMSA announced yesterday that it would restart the second blast furnace at its Vanderbijl Park operations in January due to higher steel demand. But there is a broader question here about whether we need to protect our primary steel industry to the detriment of the downstream manufacturers. To debate this, I'm joined now by Arcelor Mittal South Africa CEO Cobus Verster, Gerhard Papenfus, Chief Executive of the National Employees Association of South Africa, NEASA, and Nicolette Scholthammer, Managing Director of Betterect, which is a downstream steel fabricator. Well, welcome to the show, guys. Cobus, firstly, we have been seeing some dangerous fluctuations in steel supply and pricing. Even before COVID, AMSA closed some plants, and coming back from COVID, we've been seeing the steel supply drying up. You've responded by reopening the blast furnace C at Vanderbijl Park and the Vereeniging electric arc furnace. Why did you wait so long if steel consumers have been complaining about a lack of supply for the last few months already?
Michael, yes, I think we've based our restart plans on the market survey from our customers. So the anticipation was a certain steel demand, which could be serviced from a single blast furnace. I think one has to understand that South Africa came into a backlog supply situation already prior to lockdown, and it's not purely a liquid steel production issue that created the short supply. In the total value chain in steel, stock has been reduced by between 40 and 50%. So the value chain's ability to absorb shocks is a lot lower. And then, as I said, globally and in South Africa, the steel recovery is a bit better than anticipated 2 months ago.
Nicolette, just to bring you in there on the point of pricing. Now, our Betterect is a specialist in mild and stainless steel fabrication, installation and corrosion protection. You work primarily, you play in the mining space. What have you seen in terms of steel pricing over the last 12 months?
Extremely volatile, and it really has impacted our ability to remain internationally competitive, to the point where 12 months ago we were winning a lot of international work. And just to say that there is still a lot of international work, large projects, high volume tonnage projects available internationally into Africa, into South America, into North America. And, because of the input steel prices and the fluctuations and the increases that we've seen, I mean, there's another one coming literally tomorrow on the 1st of October. It's basically put us in a position where we are being told by our clients that we are now 10% out on pricing. And I think when you look at the duties and the safeguards that are currently in place, obviously protecting the primary producer AMSA, that 10% could be given to the downstream, and all of a sudden there's this massive increase in demand or supply, because we can all of a sudden compete internationally. And the steel prices are, in my opinion, one of the biggest constraints to growth in the industry at the moment.
And we know that that 10% is part of, as you said, the government-imposed protection for the industry. Gerhard, from NEASA's perspective, I know you've been a long-time critique of that decision, or critic, I should say. You've critiqued that decision in the past. What really stands out for you in this whole debate around whether we need a primary steel producer? Because some argue that if we do let the primary steel industry go the way of Australia, for example, it did have very detrimental effects of the downstream industry in Australia shortly thereafter. Why do you believe that we don't necessarily need a primary steel producer?
I think it's beneficial for a country to have a primary steel producer, but then that producer needs to be competitive. Currently, that's not the case. The steel price is 20% higher than the international steel price, and that's why there's the 18% duties that currently apply. So the downstream is uncompetitive to start off with. So our view is, if AMSA wants to be a player in the market, they need to be competitive. And there are many reasons why they are not competitive, but the point is the downstream cannot pay for that. I mean, AMSA will say it's, there's electricity, there's transport. That may be the case, but the point is the downstream is paying for that, and it's making us uncompetitive. And the downstream is continuously losing jobs. And we're talking a percentage of 300 to 400,000 jobs. So the downstream is bleeding, and I can say with confidence today that there's a huge amount against AMSA in the downstream, and it's on all levels just below AMSA. And so the point, and that is what I'm told continuously, AMSA's got to go. Unless they can make a plan to become competitive, they have no place in this space. And during COVID and now with the current shortages, that is just emphasized the problem.
Kobus, back in 2015, when government granted you this intervention, it was published with certain conditions with regards to the first round of duties. They included substantial investment, no price increases and no retrenchments. Have you complied with those conditions?
Michael, firstly, duties is imposed to protect an industry, not a company. In South Africa, we are the primary producer of flat. On the long side, there's many alternative competitors who also enjoy duty protection, as well as subsidized scrap prices. Then duties is not common. We are of the least protected markets in the world. All other countries have much more duties and other interventions imposed on us. In terms of our commitment, our pricing is linked to a formula prescribed by government. So in terms of an index with international prices, our prices go up and down. And contrary to general, if you talk about prior to COVID, from April up to the increase that Nicolette referred to, our prices has increased by 10%. The base price for hot rolled coil was 10,000, it moved to 11,000. So over this COVID period, 10% increase, while your exchange rate had moved by negative 13%, international prices are up 20%. So if you look at the real facts around the issue, our prices have actually been relatively stable increasing in line with international prices and in line with the prescribed formula from government. We can now increase prices, or we would like to increase prices further, but we can't. We are limited in terms of the basket.
Nicolette, does that certainly, it doesn't sound like it really washes with your experience and what you're saying about being uncompetitive globally. What is the price increase that's due for tomorrow?
So the price increase that's coming tomorrow is 750 Rand a ton. And just to maybe go back to that basket pricing structure in itself, for me, is such a fascinating concept, that in an open and fair market, you are not actually pricing your product as to what you can price it as. You are taking what the global prices are and throwing them all in a bucket and mushing them about and saying, okay, great, guys, this is what we're selling it for. So that's a whole nother discussion in itself, this basket pricing strategy that AMSA is allowed to employ. I would very much like that all the fabricators in South Africa can also do that internationally and, put all our prices in a bucket and we get to charge what we charge. But that's not a free and fair market. And just recently, as in last week, we did a pricing exercise for an 800-ton heavy engineering project for North America. And the feedback that we got was that, in Latin America, the current price in dollars for steel is about anywhere, obviously depending on what product you're buying, for a hot rolled product, either flat or, sections, is anywhere between $580 to $680 a ton. And I appreciate that there's exchange rates implications in certain things, and it might not be a one-to-one basis. But if you're using the current exchange rate of 16 odd Rand to the dollar, we are basically paying double in South Africa. So Gerhard, obviously if you say 20%, I'm saying we're paying 100% in some instances. So how are we meant to compete internationally when our input steel price at the onset is almost 100% higher than our competitors internationally? It's ludicrous.
And that is the existential the existential problem here is that some argue that this duty is just exacerbating this problem because it drove up the import of downstream products.
If we talk about effectively a duty of 10%, I know Gerhard referred to the safeguards of 8%, but imports are coming mostly from Russia and Turkey, which is exempt from the safeguards. So if there's a 10%, the only difference in price can be 10%. So how can we talk about 100% or 20%? It's just totally not. You can then still import from Russia or Turkey or other places, and the max delta can be 10%.
Yes, but we're talking about landed in Joburg. So obviously, if a primary producer in Mexico per se is manufacturing with their iron ore in Mexico, then you can conceive that it's more than 10%, because a 10% duty is after the thing's gone on a ship on a break bulk load when you're importing 13-meter long beams. So yes, it's not just going to be on a 10% basis with the duty, because obviously there's all the logistics costs that then come onto the freight of the steel. So it has to be, we have to look at what the cost is, obviously, in that country, what the fabricators are able to purchase the steel for, landed in their workshops. And it's not just 10%.
Kobus, it's about comparing apples with apples.
You can't expect us to subsidize the transport to Mexico or to the US. If you look at the US, prices are pretty much on par with South Africa. So if you do export to the US, you have to pay transport or freight rates, and then you have to pay 25% duty into the US. So whatever lower price you can get in South Africa, you will not be competitive into the US.
Well, wait right there, guys. We just have to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll pick up the debate on steel pricing in South Africa and whether or not we indeed need a primary steel producer. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about whether or not we can reindustrialize, considering the issues around steel pricing in South Africa. Gerhard, if you look at the problem, you've got a 10% customs duty, you've got a 12% safeguard duty on certain primary products. The measures appear to have encouraged industry to import finished goods, and those are often subject to lower duties and are more competitive, and they were produced locally from AMSA steel. And so there are duties in place to protect some locally manufactured goods. The downstream sector is far too broad to protect all of them.
Yeah, that is not a practical solution. This is simply impossible. The infrastructure and our team, in terms of our ports, our stuff will lie at the ports forever, and this will just open the thing for more corruption. I don't think the whole spectrum is simply too wide. I don't think that's an option. There are many downstream role players that ask for that. But that's not a solution. The solution is dropping the duties right at the top. And I just want to point out that in respect of the so-called basket price is referring to, China isn't part of the basket price. And China's steel is the cheapest steel. And there's much critique towards China, the fact that they are allegedly subsidized and so on, but the fact is they are a role player in the market. We cannot ignore China, and if we don't buy from them, then somebody else buy from them, and then we can't compete in those countries. Now, the basket price, if China is excluded, that is not a reflection of the real situation. We've got to recognize that there's a big role player. Last month in August, China produced 60% of steel in the world. Now, if America has duties against China, they can perhaps afford it because they are competition in America. So for America, it's just not a big issue. It is a huge issue in South Africa where AMSA has the monopoly. The fact is, at this very moment, because of the duties, we are killed. Downstream is losing, and I mean we are facing with a situation where there is anger. Businesses are going out of business, are cutting back, and people are retrenched at the moment, and we're talking about large numbers. So and the point is the downstream one now has to import also, but they're caught on the back foot. It is you can't start importing now. The downstream, if we have to import, then we need time to structure. If AMSA closes tomorrow, the downstream will be in severe trouble because we're simply not in a position to import. Although the big role players tell me we will cope without AMSA, and I don't say it lightly because I've had this conversation with many big role players and say, yes, give us a bit of time, we'll fill that space. So I don't know in whose interest it is for AMSA to persist playing in this space, whilst the downstream say to them, we don't need you here.
Kobus, how do you respond to that, the fact that the downstream and some of the big players are saying that they could survive without a primary producer?
I don't agree with that. I mean, I'm talking to my customers. I'm talking to a large variety of players in the market that understands the industry, that is very appreciative of what AMSA is currently doing, given the current supply dynamics, to support them and support the industry. What AMSA is doing to support value-added exports to the tune of R500 million a year, where we try to make downstream players competitive. So when we talk about, I've got a different message. A lot of loyal customers who, when we talk about the current short-term supply, we've based our projections on what we've seen from customer expectations. Obviously, everybody was caught a bit off guard. But what you should also remember, the merchants and the intermediates in the country has reduced their stock holdings, as I said earlier, by 40 to 50%. Some of these shocks should be absorbed by those players in the market. Your primary steel producer is not generally responsible for holding stock. And in terms of longer term, I mean, there's no country in the world that can have a steel manufacturing industry without a primary steel producer. And AMSA will be here tomorrow and next year and years to come.
Now, Kobus, there's a sense that AMSA and government, to some extent, have created a sort of a false dichotomy. You say either give us the duty and you survive, or don't and you fail. But you've had the duty for 3 years, and every year you seem financially to be doing worse than the year before. So maybe the effect of the duty is not only that AMSA is now doing worse, but as collateral damage, you're also destroying a large chunk of the downstream sector.
Michael, we are missing the core problem here. South Africa's growth has been almost negative for how long? Apparent steel consumption in South Africa has reduced from 6 million tons to 4.5 million tons last year. Most probably would be 3.5 million tons this year. So we have a total overcapacity of steel supply, and we're talking hot rolled coil here. Third of the market is long products, where there is substantial competition supported by government in terms of funding, as well as scrap protection. So in the long steel market in South Africa, our competitors get their input material substantially cheaper than anybody else in the world. So we're talking about a part of the equation. What we need is economic growth, and we need protection for the downstream industry. It's easy to say we don't need a primary steel producer, and then we will be like Australia, importing everything from China.
And is that a problem, Gerhard, for you, if we were to import everything from China, which produces the cheapest steel in the world?
I say no, it isn't. And you know, once we don't have our own primary steel producer, China will start manipulating the price. But that is not true, because China sells to the world. There's a price. China steel mills are competing with each other, and if we don't buy from China, we can buy it elsewhere. We can buy it from other places in Europe and Korea and from Japan. It's not only China. We don't have to buy from China. The point is, if you take Vietnam as an example, Vietnam didn't have a primary steel producer. The industry in Vietnam grew 20-fold, and now there is a primary steel producer. The primary steel producer came into a huge steel market in Vietnam and started then built a steel mill. So they did it after they were growing the market. We are trying to retain a steel producer in the market, and that very thing which we say we need is destroying the downstream. There's simply at this moment not sympathy for AMSA. And I must say, I think, I talked to a large number of players in the downstream, the bigger guys, and my message is different. And I think they feel a bit intimidated, to be totally honest with AMSA, because they know to some extent they are reliant on AMSA. When they talk to me, and when they talk to me, they ask me not to quote them. So I don't think, it's a matter of survival. And I don't know, there might be a day where AMSA International pulls the plug on AMSA, and that day will be quite a severe situation. So I say we can import. It will be a difficult period. There will be, for the interim, a bit of turmoil, but we cannot continue like it is. This is a battle for survival at the moment.
Kobus, to that point, the major shareholder, Lakshmi Mittal, is surely looking at its subsidiary here in South Africa and wondering for how much longer it can continue funding a loss-making organization. You've embarked on a process of extracting efficiencies through the business. Is that a major concern for you, that you starting to lose support from your primary shareholder?
Michael, before I answer that question, let me just refer to Vietnam. You have a country where the economic growth rate is 7 to 8% per year for an extended period of time, where growth in steel manufacturing followed that and actually increased by that. So currently, Vietnam is 15 million tons. They're the 16th largest primary steel producing country in the world. And if they import mainly from China, their cost of transport most probably is $10 and not $30, $40 from logistically where we are. So a total different dynamic, and also a country that imposes duties on imports into their country. Coming to the ArcelorMittal shareholder and support, I don't think we or myself is looking at longer term shareholder bailout. We have been embarking on a transformation program in terms of our business, which the results are actually starting to be very evident. In the first quarter of this year, the company was profitable, despite us losing almost 400 million due to load shedding and transport interruptions. And obviously, quarter two COVID is a different situation. So my focus is to make us cost competitive and have a sustainable business model that do not rely on shareholder support.
That's unfortunately all the time we have for today. Thank you very much to all our panelists, ArcelorMittal South Africa CEO Cobus Verster, Gerhard Papenfus, Chief Executive of NEASA, and Nicolette Scholdhammer, Managing Director of Betrate Downstream Steel Fabricator.